Welcome to the Great Basin Smoke Dispersion Briefing for January 19th. This is Gina McGuire. Over the last 7 days, precipitation has mainly been focused across Idaho and the northern half of Nevada into the northwest and northern portion of California, with these areas seeing some above normal precipitation. However, much lesser precipitation has fallen further east into the central Utah mountains, with virtually no precipitation further south over the southern portion of the Great Basin. Looking at the current snowpack, as of January 19th, still above normal conditions exist across Nevada into southwest Idaho, with near normal conditions over the rest of the central Idaho mountains and further east into southeast Idaho, Wyoming, and northern Utah. Again, these above normal snowpack conditions also extend down into southern Utah and the southwest. So the Great Basin as a whole is doing fairly well with regard to precipitation overall this season and snowpack. If we look at the current conditions, the water vapor satellite image from this morning shows a ridge of high pressure over the eastern half of the Great Basin, which will continue sliding eastward as a stronger area of low pressure pushes east into the west coast. This will again bring windy conditions along with rain and snow to portions of the Great Basin. If we look at the ventilation index for today, the ventilation index is still relatively low over the northern and western half of the Great Basin, but will be improving over southern Nevada and western Nevada into the Sierra Nevada as those winds increase and that storm moves onshore. Further east, we're seeing also some improved ventilation indices over parts of Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming. However, again, this will change as the storm moves eastward. On Tuesday, again today, as we look at the individual components of the ventilation index, the transport winds on the left show this increase in winds as the storm moves in across Nevada and Idaho, with weaker wind flow further east. Also, mixing heights will remain relatively low over the eastern half of the Great Basin, but will be improving significantly over parts of western Nevada and the Sierra Nevada into parts of southern Idaho, again as that storm moves onshore. By Wednesday, this storm quickly moves across the Great Basin into the eastern half of the area, spreading precipitation further east as a ridge of high pressure quickly builds into the western side of the Great Basin. This will allow for ventilation indices to improve over the eastern half of the Great Basin on Wednesday and start decreasing once again over western areas, but still should be in relatively decent shape. If we look at the individual components again on Wednesday, we see this increase in wind flow as the storm moves eastward over Idaho, Wyoming, and into Utah, with winds decreasing more significantly over western Nevada. Also, mixing heights as the cooler air moves in and moves across the Great Basin will see decrease over western areas and improve as that storm moves through over eastern areas. Looking at Thursday, we still have a strong ridge of high pressure in place across much of the Great Basin, which will again allow for decreasing dispersion, especially over northern and western areas. We still may have some increase in wind flow over parts of the Arizona Strip, which may allow for this improved dispersion for one more day on Thursday. Looking at the individual components, transport winds will remain relatively light across the Great Basin with that ridge in place, along with relatively low mixing heights. If we look at the forecast for clearing index for Utah, you can see the clearing index both today and tomorrow is fairly good across the central Utah mountains and the higher elevations of Utah, but will decrease more significantly by Thursday as that ridge of high pressure moves further east over the eastern side of the Great Basin. Looking at the overall forecast amount of precipitation for the next 3 days, you can see the highest amounts of precipitation are in the Sierra Nevada mountains and further west of the Great Basin. However, we will still see some very good total precipitation amounts for the northern half of the Great Basin, especially in the higher elevations of Idaho into Wyoming and Utah, with many areas seeing over a half to 3/4 of an inch, and even areas seeing over an inch of total precipitation. Now, if we look at the extended forecast from later this week into early next week, we still will keep this stormy pattern across the Great Basin. Every 2 or 3 days, another storm will roll through the area, and by later this week, into the weekend, we'll see the next area of low pressure approach, again spreading precipitation from west to east, mainly across the northern half of the Great Basin. We will still see some fairly poor mixing heights and transport winds across the eastern half of the Great Basin, allowing for poor dispersion on Friday. However, again, as that storm approaches, you will see dispersion improve significantly over the Sierra Nevada mountains into western Nevada, and by Saturday, we'll see improved ventilation across much of the western half of the Great Basin, as this area of low pressure again moves eastward with that precipitation focused over the northern third of the area. By Sunday, this area of low pressure moves into the eastern side of the Great Basin and the Rockies. Again, you'll also see the increase in dispersion over southern and eastern areas, with mixing heights and ventilation indices starting to decrease over western areas as another ridge of high pressure moves into the west side of the basin by later in the weekend. By Monday, this ridge starts to expand further east, again with decreasing dispersion across the western half of the area, and still some good ventilation indices over southern portions of Nevada into southern Utah. If we look at the overall forecast amount of precipitation for Friday through Sunday, again you'll see that focus of precipitation over the northern half of the area with the highest precipitation amounts into California, the Northwest, the Sierra Nevada mountains, and the central Idaho mountains, with still good amounts of precipitation slightly further south and east. If we look at later this month into the 1st of February, we will continue to see these above normal temperatures and above normal chances for precipitation with El Nino in full force now across the area. This will again keep these stormy, wet conditions along with above normal temperatures likely through much of the later portion of the winter into the spring. If you have any questions, this concludes our briefing. Feel free to contact us. Thank you for listening.